Hi, for a random review today, I've got Black Sabbath's 8th album with Ozzy Osbourne, Never Say Die. This was released the end of September 1978, so I thought it was prudent to do this as I'd previously looked at Technical Ecstasy. This is the other sort of difficult Black Sabbath album. Again, like Technical Ecstasy when I was younger, I never heard it before. People were always like, oh, Never Say Die is not very good, don't bother with that. And again, it wasn't until Guitar Pupil in the late 90s, early 90s, kind of did me a cassette copy that I was able to listen to it. Over time, it's one of those albums where I've occasionally dipped in, but before doing this, I've given it a fair good few spins just to try and get to grips with it more and give it a sort of final or main analysis at this point. So, of course, it opens with the title track, Never Say Die, which I think is a good, catchy track. Let's just have a look at the length of the song. There is some issues with song lengths, but Never Say Die is 3 minutes 50, so in that respect, it kind of predates Neon Nights. It's upbeat, it's got a more of a major kind of feel on its vocal melody, Mixolydian mode, I suppose you would say. But I think the first thing you notice with this is how trebly and scratchy the guitar is. Now, this can vary throughout the album and the mix, but it's particularly prevalent on this track, and I think more so because this is in a higher register. I think it starts on the A5 chord, this, so it's not like E. And that is an issue with the album. Tony Iommi normally has a nice thick tone, but he doesn't here on this album, and we'll sort of look at that. But I do think this is a catchy track. It's got an interesting sort of mellow middle section, but still keeps a tempo. Interestingly enough, this track was on Top of the Pops in probably October of '78, or maybe it was September. But I think that's an interesting point because along with Rock and Roll Damnation by AC/DC, these would have been the first hard rock songs, metal songs, being on Top of the Pops since the heyday of the very early 70s when Sabbath were on with Paranoid and Purple with Black Knight. Obviously you get some Queen tracks that are quite heavy and guitar-y, but really there hadn't been anything like that before. Also Sweet with Love Is Like Oxygen, although the Sweet had some heavier tracks on. But the point I'm trying to make is this is kind of the calm before the storm. These tracks break ground late 70s into 78, into 79, you start late 79, you get Rainbow on Top of the Pops, AC/DC are on again, and more importantly Motorhead on with Overkill, I believe. And this sets the ground and will set the snare for what happens in 1980, surely the most important era in heavy metal, when heavy metal kind of becomes the genre it is. It gets kind of arrived at that point. So it's interesting historically from that point in this track. So yeah, a good track. I'm not saying it's amazing, but it is good. Next up's Johnny Blade. Again, the buzzy guitar really stands out there on this, and it's got like a it's got like a kind of 60s type of blues riff, and with the buzzy guitar it gives it a slightly sort of quirky quality, a little almost parody-ish to my ears. It's got a bit of a mellow intro, but I quite like this track. I think Ozzy's vocals, by this point, there is some really good vocals, but he's starting to whine a bit, Johnny Blade, which he'll start to do when he goes solo. And some of the balls is lacking here. But the bass and drums sound good on this record. Bill and Geezer's drums are good. So moving on, we've got Junior's Eyes. This has got a kind of wah-wah riff. This is a 6:42. Johnny Blade, I should say, was 6:28. Probably too long, and as is this track, really, for the kind of tracks they are. But this has got a very melodic chorus, Junior's Eyes, and good bass intro. Got nice harmony guitars as well. So I think this is a better track than Johnny Blade. Again, I don't think it's a great track, but it's good. And then original side one finishes with Hard Road. This is probably the best track so far on the album. Really good harmonies, very catchy. This was a single. I think there's a promo video for this. It's just got a kind of kind of rhythm. This is 6:04 again. A really good track, kind of spoilt by being a little bit too long. I think with this type of writing, if you look at the Dio, what was to come, the Dio era, they get a better balance between songs that are kind of catchy and only need to be 4 minutes long, and songs that need to be more epic. And I don't think I've worked this quite out yet. And in many ways, this album as well as Technical Ecstasy, you kind of need these albums, because Iommi's starting to write more melodically to get to what they do with Dio, because with Dio they get the heaviness back of the early Ozzy era, but with the more catchy melodic side of this era. So that's side one. So, not a bad side one. Good, just not anything standing out as classic Sabbath. Side two opens with Shockwave, and I like this track. This is interesting. It's 5 minutes 15, so it's a little shorter. It's got a lot of harmony stacked on the chorus, and it's got a kind of woo ending, which I like. I think that works really well, and the vocals are really well executed on that. And then we're on to the next track, Air Dance, which is probably one of the strangest tracks the band has done. This is very jazzy. Actually really like the lyrics to this. It's got lots of kind of Dorian-esque piano, kind of like the Doors, if you know Riders on the Storm. Don Airey plays on this album, and he really cuts loose on this. You can hear his chops more on this than he's using in Deep Purple. Of course, in Rainbow, when he was in then, it was kind of not in an era where they were doing as much of that Whitley stuff. So his piano and his keyboards are really good on this album. It's just, I suppose, people at the time would be questioning, well, that doesn't sound like Black Sabbath. But then they'd been introducing keyboards going all the way back to Volume 4. This has a really kind of, if you remember the old Citroën advert, Nicole Papa, a really jazzy Dorian bit. And again, Iommi does one of his sort of trademark Django-inspired solos. But it fades out as instrumental, so it kind of has this kind of vocals for the first half, and then it kind of, I'm not saying loses its way, but it kind of becomes something slightly different. So again, it's not a totally successful track, but it's interesting. The next track is Over to You. Now, I think this is the one track on the album that I think is a cracking track. I think, this track would make a really good kind of deeper cut on the Ozzy era stuff, and the kind of riffing style predicts the future of a track like Walk Away off the Heaven and Hell album. But what's good about this, it's got great keyboard flourishes, a really interesting chorus going from like an E minor 7 chord to an A major 7 or an A chord, and then Don Airey plays a major 7 arpeggios over the top with big flourishes, very sort of cinematic almost, or impressionist, I would describe the style. This is really good. I really like it. It's 5:22. Again, it could probably be a bit shorter. They probably could have trimmed it, but anyway. Next up's Breakout. This is just mad, and I don't think the album needs this. It's a mad instrumental with saxophone. But I don't dislike it. I just don't think the album needs it. But more's the point, the album's 45 minutes long. Now, this is another issue with the mastering. 45 minutes is a long time for a vinyl album back in the late 70s, and that will have thinned out the sound even more, because the size of the grooves on the vinyl when you're cutting it have to be smaller because you've got more information to fit on. So by cutting this track, that would have got the album down to about 43 minutes. And in fact, if you look at Sabbath's other albums of Ozzy, I believe they're all about 40 minutes, 39 minutes, 41, 42. Master Reality, only 34 minutes. Very heavy sounding album, but then wider grooves. So I think this has affected the overall sound as well. Then it finishes with Swinging the Chain. And I like this. It has got a nice swing to it. And Bill Ward sings it. It's cool. Bill does a good version of the vocals, and he is a good singer. But it just seems strange having the last track being sung by the guy who's not a lead singer. I mean, if you remember on It's All Right on Technical Ecstasy, Bill sung that. I think that's indicative of the times where Ozzy is obviously going, he's got one foot out the door. Remember, he left before this and Dave Walker briefly came in, and there's actually a recording of him doing Junior's Eyes, and he appeared on a TV show, Look Out it's called, but there's no footage of that I can find. But Ozzy, it's almost gone, oh, you sing it, Bill, It's a sure sign in that way. So again, a quite nice track, but I think if I had to pick a comparison of the last two tracks, it's kind of like the last two tracks on the Fair Warning album. You've got a mad instrumental, which is one Sunday Afternoon in the Park, which is quite fun, it's quirky, but you're like, well, maybe something else would have been different. And then you got track like One Foot Out the Door, which is kind of short and a bit odd, and this is a proper song, but it's just a bit odd because Bill sings it. If you think how Sabbath normally finish, Spiral Architect, The Writ, Into the Void, Fairies Wear Boots. I mean, these are some of the great ending tracks by any band. So that's, this album didn't do as well for Sabbath, though. It did make number 12 on the UK charts, which is pretty reasonable. And I think a lot of people might have bought it at the time, and people who really like it were probably people who got it at the time as their first Sabbath album. They're getting into metal. They might have seen Never Say Die on Top of the Pops. And this is where the beginning of that, oh, whatever metal's out there, and then, oh, there's new bands out made, and so on. So this, to say this album's a failure, it comes at an interesting time where, yeah, it is, but kind of in a way it's not as well. But clearly on the tour they were supported by Van Halen, and things weren't going well, but obviously Halen blew them off. But by this time, and Sabbath had done 8 albums in 8 years, it's a heavy load. And obviously things were right with Ozzy, and there was a lot of cocaine, Tony, and Bill drinking, and it's just a lot of issues. So, they went their separate ways. Ozzy had the amazing solo career he's had. Tony and Geezer, Bill got with Dio, made 2 incredible albums, and Tony Iommi kind of carried on the Sabbath thing and made some great music. So I think, really that's it. In summary, I think the final thing to say on this is, like Technical Ecstasy, this more so than Technical Ecstasy needs a remix. And what that would enable to happen is the drums and bass are good and you could sharpen those up. Ozzy's voice, you could, probably balance it more, get some frequencies better, as you can do with all the modern tech. But the main thing is Iommi's guitar. It's difficult to polish a turd. And that's a pretty extreme thing for me to say, because Iommi's awesome. But just to try and get more bottom end and thickness on the guitar, some EQ could be applied. And I think that would make it more pleasant. So I have a feeling they might remix this. I have a feeling they've done Technical Ecstasy, so why wouldn't you do this? It certainly needs it. Okay, that is my random review of Never Say Die. Check out the album, and remember to share and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks very much.